Blessings, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. And it's a great honor to meet in live someone that I've been talking to or talking to online. We've gone back and forth in email. And then one of my favorite podcasts is David Patrick Carey, Church of the Eternal Logos. And I've seen Dr. Michael Moeller on there a few times. And we've gone back and forth on email, and finally I get to talk to him. So welcome, Dr. Moeller.
You got it, Joseph. It's a pleasure. My life's been pretty hectic this last like 6 months. We talked previously before the podcast up in Idaho now, doing some stuff with my business. So appreciate your patience, and I'm excited. I've listened to a lot of your stuff before, kind of like I told you when we were talking before. Love your content. It's a small little circle. And I definitely am excited to talk about a lot of the things that you've covered and maybe go into some different weeds. That's for sure.
Sure. What sort of doctor are you, Doctor?
All
Oh,
right. Yeah, we'll get right into it. I'm a naturopathic doctor, and my elevator speech is in the state of California and Idaho. I'm basically licensed as a primary care doctor. So, last week I wrote a antibiotic for a patient who had cellulitis. But my training is really based on holistic and natural remedies. But with that, I learned everything else, right? If I want to learn how to treat pneumonia, or I treat a lot of low testosterone, I need to understand the physiology of the body. I need to understand the biochemistry, and I need to understand what conventional methods there are. I need to understand what natural methods there are. And then I need to apply it to the situation, right? For hormone replacement therapy, I'm way more reluctant to put a guy at 30 on TRT versus a guy who's 60, because TRT will affect fertility, right? So in all forms of health, there are going to be benefits, there are going to be side effects and risks to doing any form of therapy. So one of the areas I'd say naturopathic doctors really excel is patient education, and then helping them weigh that out. Like, what is the anatomy and physiology when you're mixing drugs? What are some, we're really detectives at the end of the day. And most of the time people come to this after they've been to conventional doctors 5 or 6 times. And they're like, well, okay, I will try this alternative medicine. But like the Orthodox Church, we're the original medicine. Pharmaceutical pill stuff that came around 100, 200 years ago. So, naturopathic doctor.
Are most of your patients men?
Yeah, I focus mostly on men. As a naturopathic doctor, when you come out of school, you're basically kind of like, depending on where you're at, mid-level provider, nurse practitioner, PA. A lot of states like California, Idaho, I do not need a medical doctor supervision. I can open up shop and see patients and practice without an MD or a DO. And some states require a residency, but that's really kind of like a federal funding issue. And as far as schooling and getting that paid for, I came out of school and I went straight up to LA, spent some time in West Hollywood, and then I did hormone replacement therapy. So I learned a lot about, as guys age, their testosterone decreases. That affects, mental health, their sexual health, heart disease, all these different things. So a lot of times, most naturopathic doctors end up finding a niche, and they almost always find a niche in an area where they probably had to heal themselves. Past life bodybuilder, personal trainer, TRT was right up my wheelhouse. One of my good friends, he had colitis. So all he sees is mostly, GI stuff.
Yeah.
So the passion for healing themselves often, transforms into what things they like to see.
I don't know. What is TRT? What is that?
Just a short for testosterone replacement therapy,
Okay.
right? So we replace the testosterone. With women, they hit menopause, hormones shut off. It's pretty, hot flashes, vaginal dryness, weaker bones. With guys, right, it's a slow decline from 30 to 60, about 1% a year. And so it creeps up on them. And so, all your guys out there, get your testosterone level when you're measured when you're younger. And then if things are going wrong, you can compare it.
Okay.
Right.
Is that synthetic hormones? Is that what?
Yeah, there's a variety, right? We can do natural and holistic methods. I tell things most guys know, like, eat right, get your sleep, exercise, diet. And then there's some herbs that help: ashwagandha, tonkat ali, zinc, magnesium, some supplements. And then there's middle ground stuff, what's called like enclomiphene and ACG. those are medications. And then you can actually use hormone replacement therapy, like it's testosterone replacement therapy. It actually synthesized in a lab from a yam, but it is bioidentical. It is,
Wow.
like a key and a key lock. Testosterone that they make looks, it's bioidentical. And one of the reasons we get a lot of flack is that in women, when they were doing hormone replacement therapy, they were using progestins that came from horses, and it caused some cancers. And this was 80s and 90s. And then that threw all hormone replacement therapy under the bus for a while.
Wow.
So, but that wasn't bioidentical. That was like, some of the birth control pills and stuff, those are not bioidentical, and those do cause major problems. I mean, birth control in general causes major problems.
And guys should not, because I used to be involved with anti-porn advocacy, so guys should not watch porn.
Oh yeah, I think you watched you brought up the one study about sexuality and sexual release, and David and I, or Patrick is like, we did a podcast with November, and your hypothalamus, it is regulating everything, your temperature, your drive, your mood. When you are a sports fan and your team loses, your testosterone drops, dopamine, serotonin, and all of these things together will affect your health. Your dopamine and serotonin, that, adrenaline comes from dopamine, that raises your blood sugar, right? So we just come from a world where everything's so isolated. You go to your endocrinologist for this, you go to your orthopedic for this, you go for your GI for this, and it's like it all goes together. And we're trying to isolate all those things individually. It's like it's not how it works. And so one of the best things about orthodoxy for me is when I overlaid naturopathic medicine, like sexually, right? When I came into orthodoxy, they really take, fornication serious. They're like, no more, like no sex outside of marriage, whether it's, multiple man on man women, like with your hand, as my priest would say, no fornication, Michael, that includes your hand. I'm like, okay,
Amen,
man.
Father.
Yeah. And, and I was Catholic, kind of left it. We'll get into that. But, I drifted in the secular world for a while where, you try the partner out before marriage.
All the best of us have. Well,
Yeah. And it's not good for your health.
no.
At the end of the day, I started looking at it and it's like, we look at divorce rates and sexuality and all the stuff going on. It's like, it makes sense why God is like,
The saddest thing that I saw when I was doing anti-porn advocacy was this young guy, like 20s ish, and he had been such a porn, or was such a porn addict. He was on Viagra, which was real sad because porn had made him impotent.
Yeah. I mean, I had, what's funny is in part of, came out of school, went up to LA for a little bit, and then I ended up in Orange County for a year and a half, and I worked at an ED clinic. So the main focus of the clinic was erectile dysfunction, and I seen it all.
Young guys.
Swingers, hetero, homosexual, group stuff. There's people that go on cruises, and we have medications, Cialis, Viagra, and they just help get blood flow into the penis. We got to the point where you can inject into the penis prostaglandin. Prostaglandin goes in your blood vessels and opens it straight up. Yeah, trust me, I can tell you some stories about that clinic. Guys coming in, oh, well, it works with my girlfriend, but it doesn't work with my wife. I went on this trip and it was working there, but then I came back and it doesn't work here. And I was still kind of coming back into Christianity at that point, and I'm like,
good for you.
Yeah. I mean, you start to see these things, right? You start to see how the human body is designed to interact, I would say, with one individual.
Yeah.
And, like with porn, it's like just to sit down, and if you're, masturbating, that's not how it really works. So it's when it comes time to be intimate, the build up, the intimacy, the standing, I mean, it's that you're used to sitting in a chair like this versus like, I actually have to do things, and then the other stuff, the courting and the getting to know them. And like with porn, guys just, they can skip right to that. They just Google, figure out what they want, click, there it is.
Bam, bam, you're done. Now you mentioned that, because one of the things there were several things that interested me about you, and one of them was it like myself. You were raised Roman Catholic, but you're a lot younger than me. So,
33.
oh yeah, oh geez. So, you're a couple of generations before me. But if you don't mind, um, talking about a little bit, you know, like people that know my story, my um, um, childhood in Roman Catholicism was in here in San Francisco was pretty lackadaisical, and I grew up in the hippie Jesus folk mass guitar kind of scene. I was wondering what it was like for you. You know, where did you grow up, and I was
Bro-
wondering like what did you go to Catholic school or what, like that stuff?
Yeah, yeah. So I grew up in a small town in Southern Illinois. It's called Nashville. And my mom's side of the family were sixth or seventh generation Polish.
Oh,
Yeah,
very
and then
Catholic.
but then my dad's side, UCC, it's Lutheran, it's Protestant. I wouldn't even Lutheran, kind of evangelical. You know, they still have a service, and it's not, and they still wear like traditional robes, and there's choirs and they're singing. I So my dad was, but still, my family's super holy. My grandparents rosary every night. My mom still prays the rosary every night. My mom's prayers and my grandparents' prayers saved me. I will put money on that on both sides of the family. My dad's sister, they work for the UCC church. They go in there every day. When I got my first communion, my dad converted from UCC into Catholicism. So went to church every Sunday, Catholic grade school, church 4 days a week. Um, I'm super grateful for that. At the time, sitting in church for an hour a week, but you'll probably get a little bit of this. The whole Vatican thing, we were still, I'd say, pretty conservative. Like, I'm just from a small town. Like, there wasn't a whole lot of
Yeah.
hippie Jesus. Like, when I went to the other churches, like the Lutheran church was still pretty almost Anglican. Like, was they just didn't kneel. When I went to Lutheran church, that was the only thing I didn't notice. Right. The UCC church, again, it was just way more relaxed. Catholic church, you're like sitting like this the whole time. The wood pews are cold.
Was this the church or the parish you went to, was it heavily Polish?
Not real. I mean, so where I'm from is at this point very mutt-ish. German, like it's German Polish, I'd say, are the two denominations, but they're all fourth or fifth generations at this point.
Wow.
But the small town where my mom's from is called Dubois. Yes, everyone there is pretty much Polish. All the skis, Cherneski, Straczynski, Riziki, like just a bunch of skis. But we had like,
SKI,
yeah.
not
And I remember,
SKY like the Russians.
yeah. Um, but I do remember a little bit, like we had like a family that came in. What do you call them? Set of Atkins, set of,
Oh, set of a contest?
yeah, that they were traditional Latin mass. They wore veils, and I was like, who are these weirdos? But then my mom kind of told me, she's like, oh, she was like 5 when Vatican II had happened, right? And she was mad that she didn't get to wear a veil to church.
Mm.
And I kind of put some things together there about like, well, that's weird. They used to speak it all in Latin. They all face forward, and now we're facing backwards. And I don't really notice a difference between the Catholic and the Lutheran church, except Lutherans just don't kneel, right? They had communion. They had the Lutheran church that I went to my friends. But by like 6th or 7th grade, I was a book nerd. I was weird. I like reading encyclopedias and stuff, and getting into history. And we, even at the Catholic grade school, we learned about climate change. We learned about evolution, and the whole
Mm.
Jesus thing I started questioning. I'm like, well, was this guy real? Like, why don't regular history people talk about it? And then you'll read something like he wasn't a real person, it was a myth, da da da.
Mm.
And in Catholicism and in most Protestantism, my 2 cents, the apologetics just aren't there, right? So when they say, hey, Jesus died for my sins, I'm like, okay, so when Al flew over the barn, is the economy going to crash next week? Like, what do those two things have to do with each other? Some guy 2,000 years ago dies, and I have, I stole peanut butter from the store, and now okay. You know what I mean? I needed, the apologetics just weren't there. So when I asked kind of these difficult questions, I just didn't get good answers. And eventually I went in looking at everything else. So by the time I got to high school, I kind of lost the Jesus thing. I still believed in agnostically God the Father. I prayed every night.
Hmm.
And then by the time I got into college, I had a friend who was raised Catholic with me, and he met a kid in his dorm, and the kid was atheist. And
Hmm.
he said, "Oh, you believe in that Bible?" He goes, "Okay, you read one book, you believe this. I'll read this other book." And he gave him The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. And
Hmm.
then my buddy became atheist like that. I was like,
Hmm.
I was still like going to Catholic church. I didn't know how the Jesus thing worked, but I was like, Andrew, you're gonna go to hell, dude. You gotta like stop, repent. He's like, dude, it's all made up. And I'm like, and I was like, I don't want to deal with it. I say my prayers at night. I believe that something made this place. I don't, like the Catholic Church, at that point I knew about the sexual corruption, the Vatican Bank, and just the way the world was kind of setting itself up. And I learned about that in early college. Like, I grew up on a farm, and I looked at like, oh, the food guide pyramid is designed by, Jeffrey Smith, who is he's the president of the FDA, who came from Monsanto. So the people that make bread are telling us that we need to eat 9 to 10, 11 servings of bread a day. So I started seeing all these kind of like conflicts of interest. And even to the point, like, I remember learning about the Crusades. I was at first going to be a history major,
Hmm.
and we learned about the Mino Western Europeans went and invaded. I'm like, and then as I learned and I was reading, I was like, wait a minute, these Muslims came over through the south of France like 600 years previous. There's been wars been going on forever, but then I'm a white male. I started getting all that stuff. You're a privileged white male. Your opinion doesn't matter. We need to hear what the other people say. And I was just like, that doesn't have anything to do with my opinion. So should I paint my face black? And if I come in and say something, was that now my opinion matters? Like, you're saying that every person is the same because of their skin color. So because of that, every person needs to be represented, right? All white people think the same. All black people think the same, which is racist. And therefore you need to have all of their opinions equally. So it was just, college was a rough time for me. And I just went around just trying to figure out, where am I going? What am I doing? Health ed, history ed. And
Where
then,
where did you go to college?
um, so I originally, out of high school, I went to college, or I went to Chicago for about 2 weeks. I was going to play football there. Didn't like it. Moved back home. Went to a JUCO for 6 months, and then I went to um, a school outside of St. Louis called Edwardsville, SIU Edwardsville E. And then I transferred to SIU Carbondale for 3 years. Um, and then, yeah, I had all these things. I was a history major in Edwardsville, and then I was like, history's just written by the victor. You can't trust any of it. All the books are cooked, which
So
there's
these
some
were
truth.
these were public universities you went to.
Oh
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, public schools for sure.
Okay.
Then I go to Carbondale, and then I'm like, well, I'm not gonna be in history because I just had to argue. Like, it was so, at that point, this is 2009, 10. This is just when all the woke stuff is starting to happen, right? Like, I had a teacher who was mad about, she's like a year older than me. You know what I mean? She's like 23 and she's teaching at the class. I'm 22 and, kind of condescending. But so in this college town of mine, Carbondale, they had three grade schools, and it was kind of like lower, middle, and upper class. And they decided to put them all together because of the discrimination. And then all the rich people moved out of town. And she's just like, how evil is that these people, like, what would you do for your kids? I'm like, if I can afford it, I'm going to give my kids the best opportunity in general. I don't really think it's racist. I think it's more like you give your kids opportunity. Like, I'm not going to take my kid to a bad church because there's a bad church. Like, you follow opportunities.
Yeah.
But just very much that woke stuff was kind of going up. Occupy Wall Street hit during that too, right? We had the financial 2008, then 2009, 10. Ron Paul was real big. The libertarian movement was coming into swing. And, a lot of people, that's when they're like, they woke up. I kind of think it was kind of the second, counterculture revolution of the 60s was like these 2010 millennials being like, wow, the Matrix, the books are cooked, the system's corrupt. This isn't, you go to job, get a college, and you work for 30, 40 years. And then all religions corrupt too,
Oh.
you know? that's when you had all these battles, right? I remember arguing with my, like, as I was getting away from Christ, I remember arguing with my Lutheran friends because they had all their saved by grace stuff, and I learned that as a kid. I'm like, number one, you guys stole your Bible from us. Like, and this is before I knew about Orthodoxy, right? And, I remember being like 8, and my other Lutheran friend was like, all you got to do is believe in Jesus and you're saved. I was like,
What you described is not unusual, because I think most people, girls and boys, when they go away to college, they pretty much question everything that had come before, which is a double-edged sword. It can be good. It can be good and bad. You can, you know, be more grounded and in what you believed before. You can abandon it. And it sounds like you had somewhat of a more solid traditional Catholic upbringing, where I didn't. So when I stopped stopped being Catholic, when I just didn't bother with Catholicism anymore because my parents hadn't weren't forcing me to go to church. But that kind of happened when I was 16. I had my own car and I didn't church.
yep.
And then I got into other things. But it sounds like you had a better foundation that I did, but you were still, regardless of that, you were still sort of questioning it. Is that right?
Oh, for sure. And yeah, I can't, my parents are still together. I have 15 first cousins on that polar side.
Wow.
We had one divorce that just happened, but like very, very traditional, very conservative. I'm super blessed, really.
You are you
Yeah.
that I always say, if people, even if they resent sort of a conservative traditional upbringing, it'll help you later on. Now,
Well,
my father was on more on the traditional side, and I very much resented it and hated it. But
right.
oh yeah, so I was thankful later on that I had something to fall back on, not just complete craziness. The church never represented any kind of solidity for me, but
And
that,
those prayers pay dividend. I've heard you say that, right? Like your dad's prayer, like my mom's prayer saved me. That's for sure.
amen. When did you get interested in like medicine or anything like that, or
Yeah. So I'm wandering aimlessly through undergrad, and I came down with what's called interstitial cystitis, and I didn't know it at the time. Basically, I had STD like symptoms,
what is that?
and yeah, I had pus coming out of my penis.
Oh,
I had STD symptoms, burning, stinging, peeing, having to go bathroom all the time,
my
like a
good.
UTI. And yeah, I was in between girlfriends. I just started dating a new one, and I'm 20 years old, and I'm like, what is this? I was being safe at the time. Um, so
Safer.
yeah, exactly, safer. Yeah, I was undergrad. I was doing stuff I probably shouldn't have been, and I know I shouldn't have been now.
I bet.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
we
I
all
go to an
do.
urgent care and I say, hey, I think I have a UTI, and they go, sure, and they ask me about sexual history and everything, blah blah. They're like, you have the clap, you have gonorrhea. Here's some antibiotics. Um, we'll see you later. So we ran blood tests on me. I did a urinalysis. They gave me the antibiotic. Symptoms went away. My symptoms then came back about 6 to 7 days later. So I call them up. I go, hey, I'm still having some symptoms here. Oh yeah, we looked at your test. You don't have any STDs. You're safe. I was
Hmm.
like,
Whoop.
were you guys gonna tell me, or what was that? Like, oh yeah, well we just knew we treat prophylactically, and if you da da da, like whatever. Come back in, give me some more antibiotics, told me I have a UTI, took it, and then my symptoms came back. So went away, came back, send me urologist, antibiotics, come back, blah blah blah. Eventually
Hmm.
do a cystoscopy where they stick a camera up the urethra, look around.
Been there.
And I, yeah, not fun, right? So I
Hmm.
wake up and I'm all like, the medical doctor comes in and he goes, son, you have an improper lining of your bladder. We're going to give you some more antibiotics.
Ooh.
And this is after like 6 months. And I did nitrofurantoin, cipro. I think what happened to me is what's called, I got flox. There's an antibiotic called ciprofloxacin. It has a black box warning about ripping and killing tendons. It's not good for you. And there's a deep part of the internet that talk about when people do this, it messes them up indefinitely, like chronic fatigue, GI issues. Um, but at that point I wake up, I'm like, look, this guy doesn't know what's going on. Let's be honest. You've given me 6 rounds of antibiotics. I'm not better. So I got to figure this out myself. I worked at a GNC at the time. I was big into fitness, and I'm like, let's do this. I started researching. I'm like, oh wow, these artificial dyes and colors irritate the bladder. Oh wow, gluten and dairy can cause gut permeability and increase autoimmune function. Oh wow, like not sleeping, not drinking all this beer. Like, so I stopped doing things that I was doing in undergrad, staying up late, beer, alcohol, Papa John's pizza every night. I juice fasted, took some herbs, got rid of all the artificial dyes and colors. My symptoms went away.
Wow.
Could have been the last round of antibiotics. Don't really know. Probably not. But that was the point where I'm like, maybe these voodoo witch doctor naturopaths maybe might know something. And I just, at that time, I think Joe Mercola, if you know him, big DO, he spoke out against the agenda. He has got a really popular website and email list just talking about fish oil and
Was
vitamin C,
yeah. I was at
vitamin D.
I was at Berkeley in the early 90s. So there was an intersection between like Eastern medicine, naturopathic medicine, the occult, drugs,
Yep.
not psych, what do you call it? Psychedelics. So
Yeah.
I kind of, yeah, it's weird. I think back then it was, but I think it's more legitimate now. Back then there was this sort of this blending of, if back then if you told somebody you're going to a homeopathic doctor, they'd say, is it crystals and weed? Go ahead.
Yeah, no. What's funny is you're telling my story. Like, where does this end up going? Next thing I know, I'm hearing you should be taking 3.5 grams in the darkness to figure out your gender. The machine elves will tell you. Like
Ooh.
McKenna and Robert Antoine Wilson and Alan Watts.
Met a couple of those. Who's the mushroom dude?
Yeah, Alan Terrence McKenna.
Yeah. He was in
Yeah,
Berkeley, yeah. And I met the other one, the old dude,
Leary.
Leary, yes.
Yeah, I heard your podcast with. It was funny. Father Deacon was at my baptism. Father Deacon Ananias,
I
and I
love him.
listened to your podcast with him, and
I
um,
love him.
we were hanging out. We were driving. He goes, "This is where Timothy Leary got busted." Like, well, that's the culture. It's California culture.
He's a
Um,
California guy from
yeah,
Southern California.
yeah, that was what I was saying. He, well, Timothy Leary or Father Deacon.
Father Deacon is from Southern California. Yeah.
Yeah, Anaheim.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, I have this and what's funny is I don't know what's interstitial cystitis till I get to medical school. It's kind of like fibromyalgia. They basically just say, we don't know what it is, your bladder's messed up.
Yeah.
um but that threw me into medicine. I never wanted to be a doctor. I never crossed my mind. Like, I was never good in grades. I was the athlete. I played I played video game. Like, I was just run of the mill football, basketball, World of Warcraft kind of guy. Like,
Yeah.
I was going to be a history teacher and coach football was kind of my idea.
Not bad.
Yeah. Easy, simple life. But then I was like, man, if this happens again, I can't trust Western medicine to fix it. At that point, I had no faith in doctors at all. I lost my godmother at 11 to liver cancer too. So I
Mm.
had a bad taste in my mouth. Like, she seemed like she was doing okay. And I don't, I still ask, my mom brings it up because there was a person in town who was kind of like a naturopath. Now, again, I do want to describe the difference. Like, I have a medical degree. I'm licensed to practice medicine. There are naturopaths and homeopaths that, take a crystal course for 3 weeks. It's like, no, I had an undergraduate degree. I went through a 4-year medical school and I took PhD level biochemistry. Like, I can tell you the rate limiting step for glycolysis and the breakdown of cholesterol. But you had that, like you're saying, 20, 30 years ago, you didn't even have many naturopathic doctors. So you had, the person in town that knew herbs. And when my aunt was going through her cancer, I remember
At Berkeley. It was also the person that would like prescribe naturopathic medicine or some kind of agent, and then do your tarot card read.
yes. Yeah. Or so there are, I won't want to throw all there are people now, they do what's called muscle testing. So they'll be like, Joseph, let me see what you're deficient in. And you'll hold out your hand and you'll put a supplement in.
Oh,
And
I
so,
did that.
yeah, muscle testing.
I've done that. Yeah.
I'm not the biggest believer, but at the end of the day, placebo works. You get better. I don't really care. That's a lot of these things. Like, as long as it's not causing harm. Now, yeah, we'll get into the occult, like tarot card reading, I think is evil.
Mm.
It's a distortion of, following Christ and trying to trick the game, right? Your magic. Like, how do I do my will instead of God's will? Figuring out things that God, doesn't have planned for us. Like, I'm not supposed to know my future. And if it was, God will let me know. And that
Yeah.
takes away my faith. I'm
Yep.
supposed to have faith that he'll deliver. And I did. That's how I met David Patrick Harry when he was in Church of the Eternal Logos. Our first time meeting in person was doing ayahuasca. So
you were also you were seeking sort of truth in terms of like medicine and science, but you were also a truth seeker in terms of like spiritual world.
oh, definitely. So like you're saying, I kind of lost the Jesus thing, and then I just explored a little bit of everything. And I remember I had a
What was it? Sorry, what was the pathway? What was the gateway to you sort of doing alternative sort of spirituality? Was it the medicine, and was it the sort of the curiosity about science and alternative forms of like healing? Or
So for me, I've always been like a baby stepper, and what I mean by it's always a lot of things that kind of squeeze me into an area, if that makes sense. And so yeah, it was the medicine. I was working at GNC one night, and I grew up watching Dragon Ball Z. I don't know if you're familiar. They shoot energy beams, right? And so I always thought Tai Chi would be cool. And I read about it, and I had a Qigong guy come in one day, and he's like, "Can you feel the energy?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I can feel it." So I got big into energy healing. I took Tai Chi classes. I took energy healing, and
auras?
yeah, all that stuff. I was I, as deep as you could go. And yeah, I mean, seek and ye shall find me. I was honestly trying to seek God. Like, I thought, the Catholic thing was smoke and mirrors.
Mm.
And I saw the Protestants. I'm like, smoke and mirror. Like, this doesn't make any, like, this is even further than Catholics. And I'm like, this, just the idea of like saved by grace. Number one, saved by grace, saved by faith. Well, which one is it? If it's saved by grace, then I have nothing to do with my own salvation, because it's God's grace who decides to save me and not me. Like, do I decide to have faith, or do I, like, there's just contradictions there.
Mm.
And so I just kind of, did a cursory glance at that, dismissed it. Cursory glance of Catholicism, dismissed it. So I'm like, all right, let's go down the spiritual shop. And I was working at GNC, and he told me about astral projection.
Mm.
That was the first thing. Then I went into deep. I was like, I got a bunch of books, Robert Monroe, Journeys Out of Body. I started
I've done
doing,
that.
yeah,
I've done it.
every morning. I will wake up and I'd sun stare, and then I'd go back and lay in my bed and like try and jerk myself out of my body. Like, I was trying to give myself out of body experiences, lucid dreaming, putting the crystals underneath. I'm like, whatever, put some amethyst underneath my pillow at night, juice fasting. I got into chakras, all that stuff. And that kind of coupled, and it made somewhat sense to me, right? Because, Catholicism has a little bit of the mysticism. The Protestants, in my opinion, really don't, right? Like, when I would go into the Lutheran or the UCC church, there's no incense, there's no Stations of the Cross, there's hardly any pictures of Jesus. They do, in my hometown, those churches still there do have some, crosses and things, but I went to some non-doms, like, as I was coming back into Christianity, I'm like, there's no pictures of Jesus here. Like, Joel Osteen has a big old earth behind him. Like, this just, it doesn't make any sense to me. So
No.
yeah, I got into all the new age stuff, which aligned pretty good with the naturopathic stuff, right? Hey, go put your toes in the grass, raise your chakra levels. Green is the heart center. Red, eat red fruit and it feeds your root chakra. Eat leafy greens, it feeds your heart chakra. Meditation, I'd get into tantra. I did, ayahuasca, all other kinds of psychedelics. And really, I was doing them though because I had Protestant friends who were like, "Oh, I was atheist and I had a dream last night and Jesus came to me in a dream and I know he's the Son of God." I'm like, I was raised Catholic. I went to church 4 days a week. Jesus never came to me in a dream.
Mm-mm.
like, or what, like these revelatory experiences. And I'm like, well, I need to do something. That's what I'm talking, what I mean? Like I was seeking that. I wanted a physical, this is funny, and I didn't know the contradiction at the time. I wanted a physical spiritual experience that I couldn't deny, right? I wanted an angel to come out of heaven. I wanted God to come down and arrogantly meet, right? Who am I? Now that I look at it, I'm like, dude, you're 20 years old. You don't know anything. Like, you think you deserve the creator of the universe to come down to you?
Oh,
Like, now that I look at it, I'm like, dude, I was so delusional. So I was just like on this path of spiritual quest.
a lot of people, though, nowadays, because I thought of something you were talking, is that a lot of people feel that they can believe that they can maintain a Christian belief system, but also sort of pick and choose and adopt sort of other let's say yoga. They can practice yoga
Yeah.
and still be a Christian. I don't think you can. But so a lot of people do sort of are explorers, maybe not as deeply as you and I did, but they can sort of see it as a cafeteria and say, I'll have all this and all that. And but I'm still a Christian at heart,
Mm-hmm.
although they're utilizing all these other systems.
Yeah. No, I mean, you hit it on the head. And these are all things that I went through. And it wasn't until I got kicked in the teeth by Orthodoxy.
Yeah, people would say what you were doing wasn't wrong. Well, you could do all those things and still be Christian. Why not?
Yeah. But what's funny is, it's probably you probably listen to Jay Dyer stuff, and Father Deacon and David have talked similarly. I didn't realize though that all of my presuppositions of life were still based in Christianity. Like, you
Mm,
can't get rid of the idea that I still believed in hierarchy. I still believed that masculinity was like the giver, or like the right hand and the left hand, like these
mm,
paths, and how this is just how the universe works. You know what I
mm,
mean? Like, they're like, my morality was still a Christian morality, right? Like, so I was talking to a libertarian friend who's very secular, and we were
mm,
arguing about she was upset because there were some hardcore Christian guys arguing against divorce. And I was like, and again, hopefully this isn't blasphemous, but to my understanding, in Orthodoxy, there are certain reasons that a priest that's individually will grant a divorce. And on the podcast, the guy was Protestant. He's like, there's no reason to ever have a divorce, only if there's infidelity. Because the girl brought up, she goes, what if the girl's being beaten? And then the Protestant guy's like, doesn't matter, you got to work through it. And again, the guy was dumb, like, and it's just clickbaity stuff. But I just try to challenge her when she's secular, and I'm like, where do you get your morality? Why is, number one, like, marriage? What is marriage? Like, if you're a secular person, what you think marriage is and what I think marriage is are not the same. Marriage is a man and a woman coming together in a trinity with God to both help each other get into heaven and to have children and to increase the kingdom of God. That's it. It's not someone you have sex with and travel the world and just make money. And that's not what marriage is. And to my understanding, and again, you probably be someone, Father Turbo or someone would be better to talk about than me, but we grow up in this hedonistic world, right? Gay marriage, same thing. That was always my argument. I was born and raised conservative. I'm like, hey, if two dudes want to, and I was very libertarian, I'm like, two dudes want to go and do that, sure, but that's not marriage. Like, that's
oh,
like soccer and football. It's like, you can say you're playing football, but that's soccer. Like, this is not, these are two different, and then you start to see the whole attack on linguistics. Like, and then you see, okay, it starts with gay marriage, and then all of a sudden you're grooming, and then all of a sudden you're transgender, and like that, I went conservative, and then I went very tolerant, and then I came back conservative. I started, I'm like, whoa, this path is not, you cannot take these presuppositions. And as she's secular, I'm like, where do you get your morality? And don't you understand, by allowing this, then you're allowing this.
mm,
And if you have that Christian framework, like, I carried that with me, even though I was going New Age. Like, I don't think I really changed. Glory to God. When I came back around in, like, probably about 2016, 17, I went through the Jordan Peterson phenomenon. That's what brought me back. Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pajot, and then I found, like, Father Josiah Trenum and all that stuff, Turbo. But it was, but I was just following truth. like I saw what Peterson had. I'm like, okay, this is, oh, but no, that doesn't make sense. I was big into Carl Jung. Like I got to Nietzsche, and eventually I was nihilistic. That was when I went into the psychedelics, and I experienced some terrible spiritual warfare stuff. A lot of it I didn't recognize when I was there. It was more post that. But sorry, as you can tell, I'm long-winded. Your question about, like, I was just seeking. Honestly, I just wanted to be with God. I did, and I knew that as a kid. Like, everyone knows that. The C.S. Lewis, like, if we yearn for something of this world, that means we're not of this world. And I knew there was something bigger than me. I knew something created. I'm like, how do I know this though? But you and I both know that smoke and mirrors. Catholic Church was my biggest influence. And there are, we know where God's grace is. We don't know where it isn't, right? I still think my grandparents' prayers, the rosary every night, my mom's prayer, they're Catholic, and my Protestant friends, their prayers.
They're efficacious. They're efficacious.
And again, I don't want to be, I don't know, everyone will say something different, but.
Oh, I believe they are.
Yeah. So what do you do? And ultimately, it's easy. This is the whole trick I think that's going on now. Is it turns every person to kind of depend on themselves and become prideful, right? Like, okay, well, the church is lying. I don't trust the Pope, so I have to become my own Pope.
Sure.
Right? I have to decide what spirituality is. I have to describe what sacraments are valid. I have to describe blah blah blah. And yeah, coming to Orthodoxy was the biggest relief in my life when I was just like, oh wow, this church father thought about this. Oh, like, you know what? I can honestly just defer to the church in almost anything and be like,
Sure.
I'm just gonna go with the church father said. I'm dumb little Michael. Like,
it sounds like you had, and I wrestled with this a little bit too, but I think I had it as well. You had a mustard seed of faith from your upbringing.
Yeah.
And but with you, it sounds like it came probably from two different places. It came from, sounds like the institutional church did a fairly good job. But it also comes from your family, which is where, it should come from first of all. With me, I would say the the influence that I received from the institutionalized Catholic Church in the 70s and 80s was all negative. But I did get some good foundation from specifically my father, because he had somehow been able to keep alive, the devotion, like you talked about the rosary with your family. So my dad kept those devotions alive, and that I had as a mustard seed of faith that would carry me through a lot of things later on. And I think as well as you. Now, one other thing I want to talk about is that you had mentioned that with David Patrick Harry, but then you moved on to something else because it was the topic, that you had worked in West Hollywood, California for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, that my ears perked up because for people not from out here, West Hollywood is like the San Francisco Castro, the gay neighborhood. Although I spent a lot of time there, but when I worked, when I was involved in porn, I was dancing. I was in West Hollywood a little bit, but West Hollywood is kind of funny because the Castro in San Francisco is a very gay male neighborhood, but West Hollywood it was kind of different. It was, you had kind of more like an intersection of gay people, but then you had like a lot of straight people coming in too. So it was kind of a unique neighborhood. So what was that? Because you're coming from Illinois.
When I was asked, when was your last kind of experience there?
Oh, me?
Yeah, in West Hollywood. Like, when was probably the last time you were down there?
97.
Yeah, and so I only can extrapolate so much, right? So I left Illinois. I moved to San Diego 2013, and I'd been down to in Hillcrest. I've been into some gay bars and stuff before.
What were you doing in a gay bar?
Went in one time with mutual friends because they thought it was funny or whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
I've not dabbled in any of that stuff, but like my one of my really good friends, his good friend from Chicago was a lesbian, and they thought it was funny or whatever. I don't even, who did I go there with? I'm trying to think of the name of the bar. I was there for like 10 minutes. I'm like, I never dabbled in any of that stuff. So I'm like, this is not, and I didn't know how I kind of knew about West Hollywood, but I didn't, if that makes sense. Um,
It's unique.
what's that?
It's unique.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and again, a small town. And again, I was very tolerant at the time. I was like 2015. Now I realize it is what it is. Again, I'm all like, and I'm not here to throw stones at anyone. It's like the Bible says fornication, people who fornicate will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. So if you're having sex outside of marriage, then that's what the Bible says. So man, I'm trying to think who I went there with. We went there for a little bit. I think it was my other two roommates. It was later on, but and you know how it is too. You're around. It's like that's something like I went to Black's Beach, which is a nudes beach too. You know what I mean? Like just that you don't have that in Southern Illinois. There's no gay bars. There's no nude beach. I went there twice, and the first time I went, I didn't know. The second time, yeah, I went when I was seeing a girl who we were doing tantra, and she thought it'd be a good exercise, and we were exploring tantra and all this stuff.
Mm.
And yeah, most at it's just a bunch of old dudes at the beach, and it's weird. Like, I
You
mean,
have a lot of like trolls, yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So 2013, I moved to San Diego. I finished school in 2017. I hang around there, and then I move up to the Valley first and take a job, and then I found a higher payer job in West Hollywood. I lived in Sherman Oaks, and like I said, I kind of knew, but I didn't know. Like when I went
What were you doing in West Hollywood? Just curious.
Oh yeah, I worked at a high-end health spa. It was called Next Health. We did hormone replacement therapy. We did IV therapy, PRP, Botox, kind of all this stuff.
Wow, that would
Yeah,
work there.
dude, the gay guy, we had an RN across the hall. He crushed it. He'd be doing PRPs all day long, just gay dudes coming in and out. Like and then another one of my good friends, he worked in Palm Springs, and his
Another gay enclave.
yeah, and his the DO that he has is gay, and he has a partner, and they're really big in the AIDS industry. And so I knew a little bit about the culture, but not enough. Like when I worked in West Hollywood, I was like, everyone's gay. Like I went into 24-hour fitness. I had to be the only straight guy there.
I'm sure you
Like there
were.
was literally like 40 guys there, one chick and me, and I was just eye meat. You know what I mean? I'm like, I can just feel it as I'm walking around. And again, that's the culture there. And then I had a lot of patients that were gay. And so, yeah, you just kind of get to know the whole vibe. I was only there for 3 months before I'm like, I had to leave. But then, and at that time too, that was 2018. I started having patients coming in that had one word names that were changing their names, purple haired, different physical altercations to them and stuff. And I'm like, I'm not in Illinois anymore, like the whole Kansas stuff. It was definitely, and I just kind of in the new age. I would say 2013 and 14, I was very, very much like new agey. And then 15, 16 is when that Peterson phenomenon happened. And I was really big into Carl Jung. I was big into Nietzsche at the time. Oof. And oh yeah, I was nihilistic. Like I had some terrible ayahuasca experiences where I thought I was God. And the ayahuasca experience, glory to God, showed me that I wasn't God. Those I would talk your ear off. Those could be a story for another time. Like I dealt with demonic. Like I've talked to people who possessed. They have been physically. I'm talking people who spoke in tongues and acted like they were possessed by demons.
Ayahuasca wasn't a thing when I was in the psychedelics. It was peyote.
Yep, I went and did peyote too. I sat in sweat lodges with Native American. Like I seeked, I went to South America, peyote. I grew my own, mushrooms at home.
Is that mescaline?
I believe mescaline is the active ingredient in peyote, right? Like in ayahuasca, it's the 5-MeO inhibitor. Banisteriopsis copii is the name of the plant. So I don't know if you know, like ayahuasca is actually a combination of 2 ingredients. Yeah, you have one that's high in DMT, which is like a mimosa plant, so it's called the Bactruna shrub. Mm-hmm. And DMT is everywhere. And the thing is, though, when you eat it, you have an enzyme in your stomach called monoamine oxidase, and it degrades it. So you have to take something that blocks it. So ayahuasca is an MAO inhibitor, and they give MAOs they gave them for depression, but they can lead to serotonin syndrome.
Yes. So yes, I've been on them.
Yeah, an MAO inhibitor. Oof.
I've been on, because I was sexually abused as a kid, is that, I had psychological problems throughout
Yeah.
my life, depression. So by the time, I was a teenager, I was, because then the SSRIs were coming out.
That's
So,
well, no, it makes sense. The
so I,
MAOs were popular in the 70s and 80s, and they faded out.
yeah, I think I was on those for a very short time, and then I was on the SSRIs.
Yeah, MAOs give you way. They would if you took them, you'd be like way more like da da da. Where SRIs are way more like
Yeah.
numb you out.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But
So
that's how I also got into psychedelics because I had met people that said, "Well, you don't need this stuff.
yeah,
Do do the psychedelics."
yeah,
But I don't think psychedelics are. I don't recommend them.
yeah. I don't either. I went deep down all of them, and yeah, I can only say the grace of God made it a net negative. My birthday is August 28th, so God uses all things for good for those who love Him
Yeah.
and called according to His purpose. So when I look at all that stuff, I'm like, I did ayahuasca and it kicked my ass. And then what was funny about my experiences in those is I didn't realize how religiously and spiritually warfare they were until I came back to Orthodoxy. My last time doing well, actually I did ayahuasca a couple more times when I came back, but my last time in Peru,
Oh.
I honestly feel like when I came out of the hut that it was weird. I just felt like the Archangel Michael was there. Like and he protected me.
Oh.
Like
Nice.
I believe in intercession. I believe I had a girlfriend of mine that in my opinion had some spiritual issues. I prayed the rosary on and they did not like that. That's for sure. So and that's again when I was new age and then I left and I'm like after I started really looking back at Christianity, I didn't want to go back to Catholicism, so I went Protestant, and I'm like, just spun my wheels about all that. So I'm like, this doesn't make sense. You guys don't even pray it. Like, I know the Mother of God loves me. Like, I felt like I almost I can't. And then again, maybe it was pre-lust. I don't believe it was pre-lust. I believe that it was God's mercy, and I believe it was the prayers of my mom, and the prayers of my grandparents, and the prayers of all the people that have ever loved me
Amen.
that allowed for the intercession of something higher. I would, you know, I think that's what it was. But when I came out of that hut, like it was demonic in there. Like I saw and felt things, and I'm not holy. I was not worthy, but
But
I
you
that to
could,
me speaks volume of intercession.
but you could differentiate something that you believed was evil.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like I said, I've seen stuff in that space that I don't think most people.
I have to.
Yeah. Um.
Yeah, what's scary is like some doctors or they're doing studies like for things like ketamine, which
Yeah.
I knew as special K, and that was really
Yeah.
bad.
K hole.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I don't know how they I don't know if it's hubris in terms of man, if they think they can control these substances. Maybe they can, I don't know. But
Yeah.
but to me it seems like you're dabbling in something that you don't there's a lot of variables. And I think psychologically, because I knew people that had really like soft, mellow, warm feelings, with these things. And for me, it wasn't. It was very, very strong, a lot of times very frightening. So people can react to these things very differently.
Well, do
So,
you think um when we think about theosis and we think about the alignment of energy, in my circumstance, I think I had a bubble of after one of my ayahuasca experiences, I cried after the experience because I felt makes me want to cry. I could feel like all the prayers of my mom
mhm. I
just
mean,
pouring on me, and I feel like that's what protected me in that state. And so what I'm saying is like I think certain people have bad trips and certain people have good trips. It's kind of like the demons. It's like they're fighting and like there's something in you that like you haven't your angels, your guardian angel is like trying to keep your brain straight where they're the people who don't have the guardian angels, it takes them. I saw a guy, dude, I did ayahuasca with a guy who'd done ayahuasca like 300 times. I'm like, dude,
mm,
what are you still doing here? Like he's like, oh, I'm here to heal. And I'm like, it's not I didn't tell him this at the time. I'm like, you've been here 300 times and
yeah.
you haven't gotten over this thing. um which
And
again is
that's
different.
not going to
And
work.
yeah, when and the another thing is like from an Orthodox standpoint, I can say things like, I will always struggle. Let's just say like lust. I'll struggle with that. Like that's part of the human condition. And a lot of healing is we think that we overcome a passion, right? Instead of like with the Orthodox perspective, I know that I will struggle with slothfulness to the day I die. I don't work as hard as I should, right? I'll struggle with lust. I will struggle with gluttony. I will struggle with these things. And that's the whole point of repenting, where the world kind of, and that was kind of what I said earlier about like modern medicine says, I just give you a pill and you're done. Where you and
No.
I both know like health, like theosis is a spectrum. I have to every day struggle in my health. If I want to remain healthy, I got to continue to wake up on time. I have to eat good. I have to exercise. I have to pray. I have to go to liturgy. I have to fast. I have to do these things to remain in communion with God in my health.
Amen. It's always a three-pronged approach because I figured this out too. I have to be physically well, mentally well, but also spiritually well. So
And
all
those
three.
help, right? The stronger you are physically, right, the more it's easy to get, like, it's hard to get out of bed when you're like drinking all, if last night you had a bender, you're probably not going to get up and say your prayers,
Oh no, no.
you know?
But yeah, like because like you would have saw this in West Hollywood, is like gay men are usually very physically fit.
Yep.
And I was when I was in that world, but mentally I was screwed up and spiritually I was flatlining.
Yeah.
So that eventually you can look as good as you want, and eventually it's gonna crash, gonna
Yeah.
crash down.
Yeah.
And
And I mean,
that's
like, it happens with straight people. Like I come from the bodybuilding world, and how much of that, and again, I'm not trying to judge. I just want to look at the sickness of it. How much of that, like, and you're saying with the gay guys, it's like, I just want this beautiful body. It's prideful. I try and go to the gym so that I remain healthy, so I can be the best person that I can be. Is it great? Yeah. Is it all right if I look good? Cool. That should be a byproduct of like, am I healthy? Am I fit? Can I show up for my patients? Can I show up for my family? And once, right,
yeah.
it's a little twist. It's honestly just a little twist. Like, all glory to God, not to me. And if God takes, another thing is that becomes their identity,
Oh yeah. You
you
have
know?
to have that. You have to look good in order to look good for other people, because if you start to, backslide, you're out. You're
Yeah.
out. You're out. So
Well, not throwing too much, like, this happens in regular relationships, but also in the homosexual community, because marriage is a different thing. And there are plenty of straight people to do this, but it does become like a cycle of like, okay, I'm done with this person. Like, it was never really, and again, this happens in straight people. It wasn't really like you're chained, like, and I don't like using that. Peterson talks about, oh, we're chained. It's like, no, this is a team effort. I tell people all the time, till death do us part. Like, why would you go before the creator of the universe and promise him, I'm going to stay with this person for better or worse? That's what you did. Like, don't be married if you don't want to be married. Like, you don't want to blaspheme God and say, hey, I'm staying with this woman for better or worse. And then if she loses her job and becomes an alcoholic, you leave her. I get it. That'd be really, really hard. But you did make a promise to the creator of the universe. Now, again, you have your relationship with your priest to figure out where that line is. But I would not, I think people take it too lightly, like the marriage thing.
I've kept you too long. Can I share a screen with you? And
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
going to talk about you're responsible for this. So
I'm
can you see this?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I can't remember what interview this was with you, but you mentioned this study and you actually didn't. I don't know. I'm kind of good at this because I do a lot of this stuff when I did a lot of advocacy for uh, uh, gay people. So you had mentioned a study, and I was like, damn, that sounds really interesting. And I go, I'm going to look that up and try to find it. I did find it. I think this is it.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Basically, so there's a couple of different things we talked about that podcast, and it was about like ejaculation, and like I knew a naturopathic doctor was like, if you want to sleep good, you should masturbate before sleep because you release
Oh
oxytocin,
no.
da da da. Yeah, and I'm like, those studies are usually done on heterosexual couples with penile to vaginal intercourse, right? We know that that's where the dopamine and everything comes. So people just correlated that, well, masturbating and homosexuality must be the same thing because we're ejaculating. And if I remember right, I don't remember the specific details of the study, but just looking at the results, yeah, it talks about how like the correlation is not there, like to masturbation to regular sex and even homosexual sex, that it doesn't give the same kind of biological and physiological kickback, right? Like when you're mating with someone, you get oxytocin release, you'll have a dopamine kick, and then it drops off, and then a serotonin. And kind of like what I was talking about earlier, there is a level of like when you get paid, your subconscious knows, okay, I have money, I'm safe for a little bit, right? And when you have sex, it's like, okay, I'm procreating, like this is good, this is, oh, sorry, I ran away for a sec. Am I back?
I can hear you.
Someone called me and I moved off the screen. So, and I was just kind of challenging that, right? And not me. I mean, this study came out in 2010. I was just trying to provide evidence because there was another woman on YouTube who was all about just like, you know, ejaculating is the most important part. The other thing doesn't really matter. And I was like, let me go and look at this. And that study, and I think there's 2 or 3 other ones. But one of the other studies, if I recall, was actually inconclusive. Like the 2 of them pretty much said, no, these benefits from sexual activity has only really been studied for penile vaginal intercourse. And in this one, you can even see condom use appears to impair some of the benefits, which makes sense. God is, you know, like you're honestly from a symbolic and psychological standpoint, you're saying like, well, I don't want to be that close to you, right? I want to, the part that we're doing, I'm actually going to cover up, which, you know, it's funny when you really think about it.
Yeah, from the space that I'm in sometimes, which is like the LGBT space, this when you were talking about this, it caught my interest for a lot of different reasons. But you know, young guys, if you because I've been chased for over 20 years. So if you you know go to a doctor, and I've been to urologists and things, they're going to tell you to masturbate in order to
Yep.
keep some kind of sexual health. And I'm like, you know, I haven't masturbated in 10 years.
Good Lord.
So
Lord mercy to God. I put St. Mary up here for, I don't know if you probably can't see her up there. Pray to her a lot.
let me I know you're not an expert in this stuff, but
I look at the data on
doc
all this stuff. You know, I'm not an
doctor
expert, but
okay, but
I like looking at data.
yeah, Dr. Moeller, I don't have many people, especially Orthodox. So yeah, I don't have many people bounce this stuff off. So priests are kind of like Joe, you know, okay. Um so MSM in
Male
science
sex with
speak,
male.
yeah. So 4% of the population, 78% of new HIV infections. Um, this was kind of interesting. The syndemic of AIDS and STDs among men.
Well,
This
you
is
know
all. This is
what's
all
really,
kind. It's all kind of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, doctor.
well, I was just gonna say one of the hardest parts that I haven't been able to figure out with urologists and without being offensive, right? I don't know how to put this bluntly, and I don't know how this will come out. But one of my kind of feedback, and I understand in the gay community, it's not always oral. But when you think about it and you say, okay, where's kind of the dirtiest place that I could put my sexual organs?
The anus.
I'm just saying, and I purely mean that, not agenda. I just mean that if a young boy came to you and goes, oh yeah, I like masturbating and poop, you'd be like, hey kid, there's E. coli in there, and that's just disgusting, you know. But we don't, you know what I'm saying? Like that's just kind of a thing that's swept over from a urological perspective,
You're
and even just from like it's not good for your anus,
homophobic. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. In spite of the
In spite of
nose.
the agenda, just like from a purely biological, physiological standpoint, like bacteria, the stretching of the tissue, like
I'm gonna get to it. Yeah, so this was kind of interesting. It talks about safe sex and safer sex. I can say that this kind of reminded me of COVID too, what we went through with COVID. I came out in 88, so I kind of missed the early AIDS era. I was kind of mid era. But I remember that um, being told and instructed in the gay community, whether by activists or health department people, is that, anal sex was okay as long as you use a condom and all this stuff. But and there was a few lies that I remember them telling was that there wasn't um, AIDS wasn't correlated to a certain activity. And then the other one, they were saying like in 88, they were going like by the 90s, the 1990s, AIDS, HIV is going to be a predominantly heterosexual disease. And that never happened. So it was kind of like they weren't addressing the activity and the health disparities that caused the problem or the audience. I was thinking of like COVID. Well, that little ghoul Fauci was involved with both,
That's what I was
but
gonna say. Yeah, wasn't he? He was big in that whole system.
with COVID, they weren't addressing like the comorbidities, like especially like obesity. And they were saying, well, everybody is at equal risk. And they were saying that I remember this one health person was saying, well, it doesn't matter if the semen is deposited in the anus or the vagina. That wasn't true. And so COVID was kind of like this 2.0.
And
Sorry.
I don't know. Does the research show that semen deposit in the anus increases chances for HIV versus vagina?
Oh,
That was
yeah.
makes
Because
sense.
the vagina usually doesn't tear or bleed,
Yeah,
and like the anus does.
yeah,
HPV infection. So men who have sex with men are 20 times more likely to develop anal cancer than heterosexual men. HPV.
yeah. And that makes sense. The virus getting in there, and just like you're saying, like when you think about chewing tobacco or improper trauma to the area of the body that it's just not used to. I mean,
And
that's
they also want to immunize young women with HPV
yeah,
vaccines, which is kind of bizarre because don't sleep around.
yeah. I mean, it's pretty simple. All right, their liberal argument is like, well, what if they're raped or blah blah. I'm like, the exception to the rule is not the reason you have the rule, right? That's been my whole thing. When you think of like abortion, right? The issue is the fornication. We don't want to talk about that, right? We want to wait till there's a much worse issue. And right as Orthodox, I'm like, look, it's murder, like you're killing a baby, but we don't even want to talk about the precursor to it, right? That's half of these things. We always talk about the outcomes. We're not talking about like with COVID. We didn't talk about okay, how physically fit is the person? What is their, yeah, are there high blood pressure? Are they? We don't even want to talk about those things.
No, everybody's at risk equally.
Yeah, yeah.
A comparison of sexual behavior patterns. This is kind of interesting. So I looked at one cohort in the study. I looked at the 35 to 39-year-olds because that's usually when you're supposed to be settled down. So Dr. Moeller, you're gonna. So
So though,
yeah, so 72% in the gay cohort of that age formed new partnerships. 21% of the heterosexual men did, and 10% of that heterosexual women did. So
yeah.
quite a
Well, and
big
this is what we were
difference.
talking about earlier, just like the culture when you're looking at hedonism, right, versus theosis. It's like, what's the purpose of life? If the purpose of life is just to have pleasure, then you'll continue to,
Yeah,
for some people, experience new partners. Like that's what,
it
and
is.
trust me, in San Diego too, the swinging community is huge. I dated girls that wanted to get into that.
Supposed to test drive the car before you buy it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's all those. They're all gateways. I had a colleague, I'd say, right? He was new age, did a lot of psychedelics, got married, and then his girl had some issues. He introduced her psychedelics. She supposedly got over it, and then she wanted an open relationship.
Yep,
I
right.
mean, That's where it takes you.
Yep. Relationship factors associated with HIV risk in male couples. A lot of the apologists will say, well, not all gay men, UAI is anal sex, 90%.
Yes, I've heard that a lot. Like, oh, well, it's usually just oral. It's like, well, okay. I mean,
Really? Yeah.
I'm not going in there and doing the studies on them. So
Relationship characteristics and motivations. This was interesting because it showed that, and the study was done in San Francisco, is that the majority of supposedly monogamous, partnered, same-sex couples, married, whatever, are open relationships.
yeah,
I don't think you can say that about uh, heterosexual opposite sex.
you
The
know,
the
it's
majority, but
well, let's be honest.
say
That's
a
one of the
growing minority.
yes, and I'm with you that there are, I don't want to say that, gateway drugs that, I mean, marriage in general for even heterosexual is just getting worse and worse and worse, right? How many people, like infidelity, um overall whether, again, I don't think happiness is the best marker, but just like again, I grew up, both my grandparents were married till they died.
Yep.
Like we didn't have divorce, and it's not, this is the other thing, like you said, we want to talk about divorce, but we want to talk about what is the culture setting up for relationship values,
Yeah.
right? That's what's going to dictate what kind of relationships that we culturally, I don't want to say accept, but foster people into, right? Like with this whole pride stuff, we're fostering people into this. Like you're saying, the grooming is like, we're like, hey, this relationship is just acceptable as any other relationship. Like an open relationship, in my opinion, is not as acceptable as a heterosexual,
Monogamous.
monogamous relationship.
I
But
don't even know. I don't even know what it is. Immune responses. You might understand this more than I do. Immune responses to spermatozoa. So
wow, I've not, yeah.
56% of homosexual men had serum levels
Wow.
of IgG antibody. Uh,
Two homosexual. Yeah, IgG is like a long-term antibody. Usually, like IgM is acute. So I
so,
don't know. That paper is basically saying that, I guess, through being exposed to other male sperm, they started to have antibodies to sperm.
mhm. So this is genital infections have been shown to correlate with sperm antibody production. So I thought this was interesting.
It's
Don't matter
really,
how you do it, who you do it with, don't work.
I mean, that's interesting. I'd wonder how this, I've looked at it kind of a little more broad based, right? You've probably heard some other podcasts about the decrease in fertility in general,
Mm.
right? And I wonder, obviously, if you throw a big cohort, but again, what the percentage of homosexual population compared to the masses is, what we said, that one's like 4%, but that number keeps driving too, right? What is I think the Gen Zers versus the Boomers versus the Millennials that identify as homosexuals, just
Well, they're saying that with those, yeah, but there's a difference between identifying and actually living the life because they're saying like it's 20, but how many of those are like, yeah, LARPers, I guess they call it.
yeah, actually
So
engaging.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, the point I guess I was trying to make here, because a lot of arguments that people say, well, the purpose of gay marriage was to get people from stop fornicating, use
Mm-hmm.
that word, to settle down and marry. But I don't care. It still don't work out. It
Yeah,
doesn't,
it's the
it doesn't,
fundamental belief behind it, really.
but you don't even have to like do it from a philosophical or religious point of view. Just like physiologically, it doesn't work.
Yeah. And I'd be interested, Joseph. I assume most of these studies, I'm just trying to look at dates. It doesn't, to my expectation would be the studies have all severely decreased the last 10 to 20 years about these topics because they can be controversial. I
The
assume, right? Are these,
Dr. Moeller,
yeah.
that you were like reading my mind, because I get into these arguments. I'm in this space a lot, and some of the studies are old, And where I really came up against this was the correlation between um, early childhood, or I think they call it CSA, so childhood sexual assault,
Yep.
and same-sex attraction.
Mm-hmm.
There's a strong correlation. You
Yep.
can't do those studies anymore. Who's number one? Who's going to fund it? And then how big of an animal is going to drop on the scientists that find a strong correlation?
Yeah. And to my understanding, yeah, this what little research that was done on it, there was some pretty strong correlations with it. And I mean, you could just anecdotally talk to people. I've met a handful of people that have told me that, like, oh yeah, this happened to me. I'm like,
So biological dimming. This, this is really interesting. According to our model, if U.S. gay population, gay male population, and a U.S. heterosexual population both engaged in partnership patterns as reported by gay men, but gay men practiced versatility and unprotected anal sex, whereas heterosexual individuals practiced unprotected vaginal intercourse, the gay men population would have a major HIV epidemic, and the heterosexual individuals would have none.
mm. Yeah. So basically, if straight people are doing anal sex, there's very little evidence that they would have HIV spread.
Yeah.
Which, according to the paper that you showed, makes sense if the tearing and the bleeding that would lead to it.
The rectal mucosa of condomless receptor. Sorry, doctor.
Hey, I've sliced spot like a kid. I should preface that, right? We had cadaver lab. I've sliced sexual organs open and brains and stuff. So
Our results show that compared to men who have never engaged in anal intercourse, the rectal mucosa of gay men has a distinct phenotype characterized by higher levels of Th17 cells, greater CBD18, T cell proliferation, production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, molecular signatures associated with mucosal injury and repair, likely mediated by innate immune cells, and the
I got
microbiota enriched of the Prevolt. I don't know. People can read it at home.
Yeah, hold on. Let me read that. Our results show compared to men who never engaged in, the rectal mucosa. Yeah, it makes sense that there's some type of immune response. Like there's an immune response that's happening to guys who have had anal sex before versus people who haven't. I mean, I assume, especially, I wonder if there is there papers. I don't even. This is so hard for me to ask. Are there papers where, like you said, the tearing, like that's I don't even know how to say those things, but actually, if there's damage, it's like anything. Like I said, with chewing tobacco is the first thing that I think of. Like you're causing damage, and that we know that leads to cancer.
Yep.
Right. So if you're actually inflicting any form of damage, with obviously anal sex is going to cause damage. Not that you need the evidence, but if that research came out too, that would be. But again, I don't. Again, do you know how old this paper was? Like these things are. I don't ever see these things ever being brought up in medical literature ever again.
2016.
Yeah, that one's at least decently new.
And when I get to the quote at the end, because I've had insert of anal sex with men and women, and the approach is completely different with women than men. Male on male sex is aggressive and there's injury. Women, if they're willing to engage in anal sex, is different.
All right, I'll take your word for it.
Usually women say they do it because their partner asked, not because they want to engage in it. Anal intercourse and fecal intolerance. That you never hear. But that's a 2016 study. 2016.
Yeah, I mean, again, it doesn't take. It's funny that we almost have to have papers on that. I mean, it makes kind of sense.
It does.
You're clogging it up.
Come on, guys. HPV genotyping and risk factors for high-risk HIV infection. So the part I highlighted, oh yeah, that's bad. 82%
Yeah.
have an over HPV prevalence. 82%.
Yeah.
That's
It
human papillomavirus is kind of unknown in men. It's mainly in women.
Yeah, you can't, right? You can only test for it in a pap smear on a woman.
Yeah.
And there's different strains. Some cause warts, some cause cervical cancer. And I believe HPV is becoming like the number one quote unquote STD at this point.
Wow.
Yeah. I
In
think
in
both.
in which sex?
Yeah, both men and women.
Oh, lubricants and rectal douching. Sorry. So if you do stuff like that, not too hot.
Yeah.
In Europe, oh, this was interesting. So, a transcontinental survey of gay men reported that 88.5% engaged in anal sex in the past 6 months. Meanwhile, a surveillance study of gay men in 16 US states reported that 57% had anal sex with at least one partner in the prior 90 days, three
Mm.
months.
Yeah, and that's a feedback to the argument that there's no anal sex happening.
Exactly. This is really interesting. I thought you would appreciate this because you're a holistic, kind of guy. You're looking at everything. And this was written by the guy that wrote And the Band Played On, Randy Schultz. And he's talking about the trouble with an all male subculture, which is what you have in the gay community, is that you have no there's no moderating role that women play in the heterosexual
Mm.
milieu. See what I'm saying? That's
Yeah,
why
I
you
think
get
I heard you
that's
talk
why you
about
get
that
a
with
greenhouse effect.
what's oh, the female you had, younger Amy.
Oh, Justine. Oh
Yes.
no, Julie Mestrine.
Yeah,
Julie
Julie, when
Mestrine.
you had her on, you guys were talking about how, yeah, and a lot of times in relationships, the woman's kind of the gatekeeper, right? And
Hmm.
so like the difference between a lesbian relationship and a male homosexual relationship. And this is what's funny. I didn't talk too much. My friend lived with some lesbians on and off. And it was funny because there's stereotypes for a reason, right? Just like the difference, like you guys kind of brought up, there was more backstabbing, there was more jealousy, and the gay community is like, oh, I'm done with you. See you later. We're going somewhere else.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. But I mean, women really play that moderating influence in men. Because imagine a world where women don't exist.
Well,
Right?
and
How
yeah,
how
there was a study where they had males on college campus, right? And they're like, okay, go around and ask every woman to have sex with you. Tell us how many it takes. And it take like, 30 to 100.
uh,
The girl, first guy, almost every time, you know? And so then it makes sense. Like, yeah, if you take a bunch of girls and you put them over here, you take a bunch of guys over here that can please themselves and they're homosexual. It's like, that's how that whole subculture you would, and again, these are generalizations, but
I've had this conversation. Would a man have sex with a woman that he wasn't really attracted to, but she was willing to have sex? Would a woman have sex with a man that she was not really attracted to? Hell no.
yeah, usually not. Unless you have a like so
And I bet a lot of guys would have sex with a woman that he wasn't really attracted to, but he was going to have sex with her.
yeah, it's 1 a.m. and you're leaving the pub, and
Everybody looks good.
yeah, I mean, what's it super did you ever see Beer Fest?
Yes.
You know the scene, right, where he's like trash and he thinks she's all beautiful and he wakes up the next morning. Oh, Barry Bashernap.
Thank God. But men, and I'm not saying that men are pigs and women are angels, but God created, men and women with different temperaments for a reason
Yeah.
because they balance each other out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've heard that before. Like women, right, are kind of the key to dating, and then men are usually the key to marriage, right?
Hmm.
It's usually the guy has to ask the girl on the date, and then it's usually the guy that by that point the woman's ready for marriage, right? I've heard that more often where the guy's like, oh, my girl's just not ready for marriage. It's almost always like, girl, when's he going to put a ring on it? You
Exactly.
know?
Gay men are 140 times more likely to contract HIV and syphilis than straight. And then I put this in. So, according to the American Lung Association,
Hmm.
23 times male smokers compared to non-male smokers. But we're not going to talk about that 140. Right?
Oh no. Yeah, we don't want to bring up any of these things. And like I said, at the end of the day, you would just want to be objective. So, and I've told you I do this testosterone replacement therapy. I just tell guys, these are your risks, these are your benefits, right? So I think, yeah, you'll groom kids to do these things, but you won't say, hey, just letting you know, you have 140 times chance of contracting HIV. And I will say in defense too that a lot of studies, you have what's called, you probably heard, relative risk versus absolute risk.
Mm.
So like if your risk is, let's say, 1 in 10,000 of getting syphilis, if you're gay, it's 140 in 10,000. So it's still not great, but it's 140. Like that's what they did with COVID. They liked manipulating all that. So
Mm. This is kind of the end result. This guy don't look nuts. Men hate church and spirituality because they have to sit still and they have to be receptive. There's nothing more threatening to a male than being receptive. I mean, think about it sexually. Maybe that's why gay men are more ready for it. Catholic priest Father Michael Holleran.
oh,
Don't you want to hang out with this dude?
I'm all right. I'm all right. I mean, hold on. I'm that quote confused me a little bit, to be honest. Was he trying to say that gay men are more likely to be spiritual or what?
Yes, because because
Oh,
they're more adept at being receptive.
interesting. I mean, that's a
But
interesting way to look at it, but well, and that's so funny too. We didn't really even get into when you look at masculinity, the perception of what masculinity is anymore. There is a level of it that has been so confined to the warrior instead of being the king who is open and who is loving and is kind and can be vulnerable in situations that he should be. I almost always think of The Lion King. Like I can't really think of a better movie where you shortly get to experience a very masculine figure, right? Like he's broad shouldered, and I know it's a cartoon, but I like King Leonidas too. He's actually really, really, there's a little too much of the warrior in him. Which I remember growing up, like, now all masculine figures in cartoons and stuff, they're mostly bumbling idiots. But you look at Mufasa, he's just like well respected, and he goes and saves them in the graveyard, but then also tells his son like, hey, look, I was scared to lose you, like you're important to me. This balance that we've lost in masculinity to be like, to
shame,
be loving.
The Western shame.
Yeah, for sure. you
Yeah.
know and I mean, obviously Christ embodies that probably more than anyone, and we lose that idea of like total masculinity does involve suffering in the way that he's so strong. That's he's Christ is the ultimate stoic, and I think we've lost that in masculinity, and that's what I'm saying. That quote, he's like throwing shade at the Western ideas, like, well, men aren't receptive. It's like, man, a good man should be receptive to anything. Like, how much I had to humble myself. Like, and again, it's a humble brag or whatever. Like, Lord have mercy on me. But I had to admit I was wrong so many times to get to where I'm at.
Me too. Me
Like,
too.
to humble myself over and over again. And I'm a prideful person. Like, I think I'm right a lot. Like, I'm a doctor. Like, right. But then you also realize the only way you're ever really right is to continue to be humble. Is the only way you become right.
And
If that makes sense.
you're also willing to shift course.
Exactly. Exactly.
You
Because you'll
know,
never get there. If you think you're right and you know everything, you'll never get better.
and how many men are willing to drag other people around along with them? Because I've seen when I was doing a lot of the study, like researching this sex stuff, is that I don't. I think men have been very corrupted in this area, especially through pornography. And
Yeah.
how many people are there dragging along with them? Their wives and then their kids.
Yeah.
How many kids are addicted to porn and their parents are watching it too?
Yeah. What's funny, like this conversation that I thought about, just like the idea of grooming. And, I remember, like, I was born and raised Catholic and I was taught masturbating was wrong. And then I remember the other boys telling me, like,
I
oh,
wasn't.
dude, oh, I did it 5 times yesterday. My hand is raw. I'm like, what is wrong with you guys? But then they all looked at me like I was the weird one. And I felt pressured into like, how does this work? Like, this isn't a vagina. Like, how, you know what I mean? But it's funny, the whole culture is indoctrinated. Like, you really look at the spirit of evil, and like coming to Orthodoxy for me was realizing how it's overspread everything. Like basically you have 13-year-old boys grooming each other into fornicating, right? They're pressuring each other. You get into public school, and if you're not fornicating, you're weird,
Worse
you
than
know.
that.
And what, yeah, in whatever way, you're not watching porn, you're not doing this, you're not doing drugs, you're not, and it's like, and then when you look to the church, you're the weird one. It's like, oh, I'm saving it for marriage. What's wrong?
Well, in this is, and I kept you too long, but and I'll just get your response to this.
Yeah.
Is that what I saw in Orthodoxy is that there's a space for men to be noble, to be righteous, to be brave, to be masculine, but also to be pious and to be chaste. I didn't see that in it gets weird in Catholicism because you have the celibate priesthood.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, well, I ain't that. So that's my example. But in Orthodoxy, I think you have a more well-rounded example. I mean, you're one of them, no pressure.
Yeah.
But
Lord
there
help
you
us.
go. There you go.
No,
But
it's
we
funny. When I first started inquiring, I had a girlfriend at the time. And when I was telling her about Orthodox, and again, I peeked into it, felt it all out before I started bringing it up, and I was slowly ortho pilling her. And she's like, "Oh, I don't want to go see a priest for marriage relationship advice. They don't know anything about that." And it was funny because I was in SoCal, and I was like, "Do you want to go see this guy, Father Josiah Trenum?" She's like, "Oh, what does he know about marriage?" I'm like, "Well, I'm pretty sure he
I,
has like 8 or 9 kids or whatever."
and
Yeah, and that's and again, she was raised Catholic like me, and there is some truth to that. Like, you have priests who are fathers. And not all priests need to be fathers, but
no,
you get how there's a direct correlation to having kids and then taking care of your flock. And I get it. Like, I grew up Catholic. Like, I don't want to go talk to this guy about fornicating, or like, what does he know? And like, he shouldn't know it. Like, again, he'll have, lust, but he's not in the dating scene. I'm 30. Like, when I go to talk to my priest now about like my situation, right? I'm 33. I'm single. I'm having to deal with these things, like, can't be fornicating. How am I supposed to date a girl? And then, lust and a lot of the things David Patrick Harry and I talked about. Cause I did, I have a history of dealing with that stuff. And now that I'm Orthodoxy, I've had to leave that at the door. Much like yourself, you have to be like, wow, I can't do that anymore. Like I told your mom, priest, like, no fornicating, not even with your hand. I'm like, okay, so I'm just
of course.
not supposed to do this ever again. Mary of Egypt, pray for me, because the environment that you grow up in, that is really weird. Like, that's very strange, right? And like you're saying, from a health perspective, oh yeah, you have to clean out the pipes a couple times a week or you're gonna get prostate cancer.
Hmm.
So it's definitely, our young men, they definitely have an uphill battle with all the widespread bad influences. And yeah, who we got now? Andrew Tate, that's who's leading these boys, you know? So Lord have mercy on us. I am excited. I see more and more Orthodox stuff online. I just hope it starts to reach more and more, guys like Father Turbo and Father Josiah and Father Peter. So hopefully
Father
they start
and
listening.
and
Who's that?
Father Ananias Sorum's been a good example to me.
Yeah.
Very, very masculine man, but also quite compassionate, quite
Yeah.
quite paternal, and quite a good man. I like him a lot. It's
Yeah.
a
Very cool.
different um, there's a different flavor in Orthodoxy than in Catholicism, and
Yeah. With
it's hard to put a
Catholicism,
finger on.
I think Catholicism is kind of like when I was in third grade and I saw my teacher out as a real person, I was like weirded out. And
Mm,
that's how I feel like Catholic priests. But like when I've met Orthodox priests, they're just like, when you talk to and I haven't talked with Father Turbo, but the other priests that I've seen online, and like your interview with them is like, he's a kind of normal person. There just feels like this thing with Catholicism that they're almost stuck between that area of monastic and priest. You know what I mean? Because
mm,
monastics kind of bring a different vibe too. Like they're removed from the world. Like that's their job. They're on the monastery. They're praying. They're fasting. They're doing all this thing. And so, like in Orthodoxy, we have that, right? We have the monastics holding the fort down, and not that they don't in Catholic, but I don't know what the Catholic Church is going to do. They're not going to have any priests soon. Their nuns are gone. Like they don't have the monastics anymore. You know, we had the last nun when I was in kindergarten. I mean, is there some in San Francisco? I don't even know. Do they have nuns left anymore? Where are they at?
Very, 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 very few. And unfortunately, Roman Catholic, the Roman Catholic priesthood has become kind of a gay occupation. I hate to say it,
I mean,
but
yeah, that Jesuit stuff and
it attracts a certain guy uh, that a lot of times is unhealthy. So I think it's and Catholicism is a top-down organization. So when it starts to get shaky up top, the whole thing is bad.
yeah, I mean,
And thank God Orthodoxy is not. It has a
yeah,
hierarchy, but it's not the hierarchy that the Catholic.
yeah. We'll pray. I mean, Jesus promised the gates of hell will not prevail, and that again was a big me kind of coming to Orthodoxy. So when I look at the Church and the Vatican, and not that Orthodoxy doesn't have its issues too.
It does.
We see that with Bartholomew and with is it Francis now? Or Benedict, yeah, Benedict was the one that was gone. Pope Francis, right? I mean, he's like in the Clintons are there and the Obama, like they're doing like ayahuasca and the Vatican and stuff. And I'm like, dude, I know I did that stuff. That's demonic. Like that should
Pachamama.
not be. And
Pachamama.
yeah, yeah. So we'll
Thank
pray
you.
for him and
Thank,
yeah.
thank you, Dr. Moeller. I kept you
Hey,
too long.
sorry. No, it's all me, man. I'm the rambler here, so I appreciate you having me on. And whenever you want to do it again.
Hopefully, I was going to say, hopefully we could talk again, but thank you. And then, can I put like your website or something
Yeah,
okay.
it's easy. It's just drmichaelmoeller.com, and most people can find me on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube pretty easy.
I will put it for everybody. I will put it in the video description.
Cool.
God bless you, doctor.
God bless you. Thanks for having me.